You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by, that's right, every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here to talk about the news. We're Han Solo today, but we've got some interesting topics to cover from the last few weeks since I've been lacking of an episode. It's been a month, and so I apologize for that, but I've been in China and will be here for another week. It's great to be here, and there are so many things that I'd love to talk about. Some of them I chatted about in my newsletter, including Beijing's traffic control system that still lets some traffic jams happen. Lots of interesting transportation adventures here as well. And you can see some of the pictures from my Instagram at the Overhead Wire. But I've got a couple of highlights that I wanted to share with folks here listening to the Monday show. First is taking high-speed rail was really fantastic here in China. The train was really smooth. It felt like you were going through at a speed that just seems like you were floating on over the landscape, and it just seemed like faster than it was supposed to be. So we took a trip from Datong to Beijing, and it was basically like 2 hours and 30 minutes trip, and it felt like 30 minutes tops. Like it really felt like it went by really, really fast. Maybe that's just because I was excited to look out the window or something, but it was really interesting. Also, along the way, you saw a lot of China's landscape, which is really interesting too. They've covered a lot of their hills and mountains with solar panels. There's a lot of corn out there. You think about Nebraska or other states in the Midwest, and it felt a lot like that to me. Although there's windmills everywhere, there's solar panels everywhere, and of course there are other energy plants too. But I saw a lot of that happening over there. The second thing was taking the subway in Beijing. It was the largest subway in the world, as we shared at trivia night at Spur the other day. But it was really good to get to notch another subway on my belt. Really enjoyed that. It was fun to take the train when I could and get to places where we need to go. It was really fast, especially considering what we were talking about from the traffic perspective. Beijing has about 22 million, 23 million people, 8 million vehicles, and what happens is there's a lot of traffic in the center city, and they have such restrictions, license plate restrictions, such that the last digit of your license plate determines whether you can go into the urban core or not driving, and so they'll give you fines if you're driving on the day where your number is not supposed to be in there, and it adds up after a while. A 24-hour period, they can fine you like every 4 hours basically if you're driving, but it doesn't stop some folks from driving. We were on a tour with our tour guide, and actually we got stopped because he was driving on a day he wasn't supposed to, but it's part of his job, I guess, is to take us around. We didn't know, but we just got pulled over by the police, and they gave him a ticket, which is really fascinating. I'm guessing it's part of it's not like it's a civil offense, really. You just pay a fine, so it's not going to get anybody a point off their license or anything like that. But it was really interesting to I guess experience it, even though a poor driver had to pay some money. The other thing is that the license plates, like they have a character on the left, and then they have the letter, which is the main, represents what city you're from, and then the rest of the license plate. And so if you're driving to Beijing from other places, you can't drive into Beijing if you're from another city. And so they can tell by your license plate whether you're from another city or not, which is really fascinating. I mean, in the United States, we have states, but we don't say you're in San Francisco or you're in San Mateo. But here they have that designation on license plates. You can tell where someone is from based on just reading their license plate, which is really interesting too. The food is super good. It's really amazing. There's so many different culinary cuisines, some expertise, obviously the South and Cantonese food. You have food from Nanjing, you have food from Beijing, you have food from the North, which is noodles, you have food from the South, which is rice-based stuff. You do have food from all over the place. And I really highly recommend, one of the first things that my wife showed me when we first met and we first started dating was this documentary that's in English. It's called A Bite of China. And it shows all the different, basically histories and cuisines that are around the country. It's not, monotonous. It's not a single cuisine that takes up all of China. It's a bunch in different neighborhoods and different places, different regions of the country. So I highly recommend checking that out. The food is really good, just everywhere I've been. All the food is amazing. The other thing that's really interesting was when we were in Taiwan was the hyperdensity, the amount of tall high-rise buildings that exist in a city. And so think about like an urban core like Houston and the 610 loop and everything inside of that, and think about putting 4 to 5 million people in there. That feels like what Taiwan is. It's a small regional city. It's the capital of Shaanxi province, but it's also got a lot of these high rises, and it has a 2-line subway system which people can get around on. There's a bus network. There's a lot of people who ride motorbikes, but it's really interesting to see that hyperdensity, just like that amount of 30 to 40 story buildings going higher and just everywhere. If you see some of the pictures I took, it just seems like they're never-ending hyperdensity buildings. The other thing is the cultural amenities. I mean, lots of Buddha, obviously, but like the history here in Taiwan is interesting too. They invented checks and banking for traders when people were going from Mongolia down south to Hong Kong and the areas in like Vietnam and things like that, the trading roads and things. Really fascinating. And the history here is much, much older. It's like 400 AD to some BC versus US, which a lot of it comes, especially like in places like San Francisco. Obviously, you have the mission and that stuff, but you have a lot of the buildings are basically from the late 1800s, early 1900s. If your city is lucky, sometimes it's hard to find those buildings if you're in a smaller city. So that's really fascinating too, is that some of this history goes really far back. The Chinese obviously had a really thriving civilization for a really long time, and it's interesting to see that history too. The last thing I'll mention is just like there's so many people here. So many people. I think even if you're used to people, I think you just would be overwhelmed. This week is a national holiday. They're combining the National Day, which is, I guess, the formation of China as it's modernly known, the Communist Party. And then this coming up is the Moon Festival, the Fall Festival. And so they combine those into one holiday this year. And so there's like a week off for most folks, although there's a lot of service folks that don't get time off. But what's interesting about it is that everybody decides that they're going to go travel those days because they have time off. And so the places flood. So we went to the grottos, which are these famous hill carvings of Buddhas that are carved into rock. You can see them also on my Instagram. And it was pretty busy then. We were, kind of shoved around and a lot of people trying to get into a small space to see some of these interior spaces. But basically the next week, which is the national holiday, my wife was telling me that on Red Note, everybody was saying like it's all shut, they're basically saying to shut down because nobody else should come because it's just too many people, hundreds of thousands of people. And so when we were there, they were saying, well, on average, there's like 20,000 people an hour. I was like, 20,000 people, that's like the same amount of people as ride the J Church every day, which is an insane amount of people. And so you just can't fathom how many people there are until you're kind of in the thick of it. They also had to shut down the border apparently today at Macau because there's just too many people trying to get into Macau from outside in mainland China. So just crazy amounts of people. And so just really interesting stuff. All the city stuff, but also the cultural stuff is really fascinating too. I hope folks get a chance to come here at some point to China. I'll talk about this later in my Puppies and Butterflies, but I just hope folks get a chance to come because it's so really cool to experience a place that's totally different from where you might be used to. Okay, so I'll probably share more as it comes to mind because this is just like, being in somewhere for a month, you get a lot of experiences that you can't just bring up all the things that happen at once because they don't come to your mind specifically, but there's a lot of little things that were really interesting the last few weeks. But I'm sure they'll pop up on the podcast in the future. But as we do, when we're Han Solo on the podcast, we talk about some of the episodes that are coming up. And so I just had passed actually, because we haven't done a Monday show for so long. I'm still working on the Kingwood episode from before I left for China, and we completed the script of it, and Sophia and I organized all of the audio for the guests. So all I need to do is my own recording. And here I'm talking on my Tascam. It's a little tiny recorder. It's something that you basically, if you're a press person, you probably have going somewhere. It's not like a big microphone or anything. And it's not really the best sound. It's okay. You can hear that it's not bad. You could probably hear the traffic in the background too, all the honking. But it's not the best. So I'm going to wait until I get home to get a better microphone to record those. And then Sam Sargent was on the pod a couple of times. We had him on twice, 2 episodes, former Caltrain and now VTA man. He talked about a lot of things, including Caltrain shipping off its old diesel trains to South America, some leadership stuff, including why his old boss at Cap Metro, Randy Clark, now at WMATA, was such a good leader and what he thinks about leadership. And I just found the discussion really fun and fascinating. And also, if you missed that VTA episode, I feel like a lot of people got a lot out of it. Maybe even folks in the Bay Area that might not have heard, people talk about VTA VTA too much because, a lot of the focus in the Bay Area, especially from transit advocates in the North Bay, comes from Caltrain and Muni and BART and maybe even AC Transit, but not a lot from VTA. So it was good to hear a bit about that. Former FHWA Deputy Secretary Andrew Rogers was on the show. That was really great. Adele Houghton and Carlos Castillo Salgado are coming on to talk about their book, Architectural Epidemiology. That was last week. The really interesting thing about that book specifically was just all of the pushback on these rating systems, all the pushback on architects who, will put stuff up on the end to think about public health, but hadn't thought about it before. But the most interesting thing to me was just looking at her and Adele and Carlos talking about taking lead in other buildings and looking at where they were built and, how, the way they got certified, and just saying, like, you built these buildings, but they're not addressing neighborhood needs. They're not addressing the climate impacts of a neighborhood. And not that an individual building can solve everything, but if you start to do building by building and start to address some of the issues with those buildings specifically, whether that's indoor air quality, whether that's we'll talk about mosquitoes and infectious diseases in a little bit too on the news section, but just all those things, bringing them together and putting them in a place where architects and designers and infrastructure people can look at what they need to do ahead of time, what is prevalent in areas, what are the issues that places are facing, and then how they can design to address that. I think that was very, very powerful. And so I hope folks get a chance to check that out, the book and the episode that we recorded. Ben Donsky will be on the show as well, and we were talking about activating space under a highway in Birmingham, Alabama. That was really interesting. And then after that, I'm not quite sure because I have a few ideas about things I wanted to do. We still have another week here where I'm going to be flying back, and I'm not sure if we're just going to have another flashback episode or if I'm going to have something ready by then. And also, I'm going to be chatting with Doug Gordon and Sarah Goodyear of the War on Cars about their new book, Life After Cars. The folks from the War on Cars are going to be on the show a little bit after we land. So we'll see if I'm punchy or not. So we got a lot coming up. We also have MPAC coming up soon, which I'm going to record a bunch of shows there as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. I haven't scheduled any specifically, but I got a few in mind, and then we're going separately from MPAC this year as we haven't been doing any Impact podcasts lately. So probably going to have a few more things to do, but looking forward to doing all that, and hope you all keep on listening. Thank you all for supporting. I've had a couple of folks who've become supporters while we're here in China, away from our desk, and so I'll get you all your stickers and everything, and also scarves. I mail those out. It's not just like I don't contract with anybody. I just ordered the scarves. They're sitting in my home, and so I whenever somebody orders one, I send one out. So thank you very much. I've emailed everybody, and they're very patient, and I appreciate that. Also, it's fall, so maybe scarf time is coming, and that kind of leads into our usual. This is thanks to everybody who's ordered bus or bike scarves. If you'd like to order one, just head on over to theoverheadwire.com or email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Bike-only knit scarves are back in stock. Just order one up, and we'll get them to you by mid to late October. My guess is late October, because when we get back in the mid-October. But we'll get you them as fast as possible. And so it's turning into winter again. We're coming around, and so hopefully folks are ready for the scarf season and getting ready for that. Also, thanks to everybody who supports us on Patreon, patreon.com/theoverheadwire. You'll get a handwritten note and some stickers if you donate $2 or more a month. And then $10 or more a month, you get one of our scarves. And then also, thanks to the folks who have been buying books off the bookshop site. We really appreciate that too. bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. You can buy any book you want, not just the ones that we've had the authors on of, but it's really cool when folks buy the books that we've had the authors on from, because I appreciate that people listen to the show and then really, really want to get the book. So that's awesome. And then get some of our Cars Are Cholesterol merch as well, bit.ly/carsarecholesterol. You can find Richard Wazensky, the designer of that, on Dick David Sketches on Instagram. Appreciate Richard for his hard work on that, and then also just really cool design that people really love. So we also strongly suggest that folks sign up for the newsletter at theoverheadwire.com. Thanks to everybody for listening. And now let's get to the show that you've been waiting for. This is episode 179. We're live and in session. You can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts. And thank you for those who subscribe through their podcatchers. We really appreciate that. So, as we're in the news now, as you hear all the honking in the background, here's a few stories that piqued our interest from the newsletter over the last few weeks. I'm going to go through these rapid fire because there are so many of them, and then we also have some bonus ones, and hopefully it's not too long. It doesn't take too long. But Also, another thing. I know that there's a lot going on in the U.S. with the shutdown and certain secretaries and OMB directors and certain presidents sending troops to places that they shouldn't be. There's a lot of that stuff going on, and I'm guessing we'll address some of this in the future, but in this episode, we're going to go kind of back in time to stuff that happened in the last 4 weeks. So we'll try to address those things later, but I know that they're happening, and I know that they're going on, that people are frustrated by some of the things that are happening. Man, people honk a lot. That's another thing. People honk a lot around here, but it's not like angry honking. It's more like, hey, listen to me honking. I'm trying to move into a lane. The driving here is crazy too. Is bonkers. So anyways, I hope in the future I really like it at my studio at home, and there's not a lot of sound and there's not a lot of honking. But here there is, so we get some in the background, which is okay. Harder to afford a home. A new report from the National Housing Conference finds that middle-class people are finding it harder and harder to buy a home. Now, 32% of metropolitan areas require double the salary needed to afford a home in 2019, and 45% require an income above $100,000 a year. But the changes are not just in high-cost coastal areas, but in areas that previously were seen as affordable. This was by Brittany Webb in the National Housing Conference. I just think stuff's getting less affordable as we go along. And it's pretty crazy how much stuff costs, especially housing. It's going up and up and up, and people's incomes aren't going up. And it seems like things are good because of the prosperity, but the prosperity is really, really at the top. So it's frustrating for folks to try to find homes and places to live that aren't like breaking the budget. Why China Builds Faster. A new book by Canadian Dan Wang suggests that the reason why China can build and the U.S. is stuck is the difference between society being led by engineers in China and lawyers in the United States. In podcast discussion with Vox, he suggests that both mindsets have their drawbacks. In the United States, our crumbling infrastructure is a sign of a system that works for the rich, whereas in China, the engineering mindset begets project development but also treats people as a math problem. This is by Sean Illing in Vox. It would be fun to read that book, especially after I've been here for a little while. But I find that framing really interesting, especially with the back and forth that goes on between Americans and Chinese higher up folks, not the regular folks. They don't really seem to care that much. But the folks higher up have these discussions that they have. A new electric company, Ann Arbor, Michigan, is creating a power company that would build renewable energy inside the city limits, including through microgrids and a rooftop solar. The existing power company didn't want to focus on renewable energy, so the city set out to build something that would help them reach their climate goals faster. The new power company, created despite an existing one, won't have to worry about legacy infrastructure maintenance either. This was by Adele Peters and Fast Company. This is super fascinating. It gets to a point that I think I've been making about places like San Francisco, where there's this legacy infrastructure, and if you take over infrastructure like that, you have to pay for it. You have to pay to maintain it. You have all these issues that come along with serving people. But if you build a new infrastructure, obviously down the line you'll have infrastructure maintenance and things like that. But you can create a whole new structure, especially for renewable energy. I mean, you can create microgrids. You can create solar panel areas. You can give people incentives to get their heat pumps and all that stuff. Really fascinating, and I hope more cities actually go along with this and say, okay, well, the existing company can do what it wants, but we're going to build something new and something that can be sustained long term for our future and our climate change impacts. Okay, next up. Dutch cities want to regulate e-scooters and fat bikes. 5 large Dutch cities are asking the Netherlands for the ability to regulate e-scooters, big-wheeled bikes, and other motor-powered conveyances that have been using bike lanes. Local transportation officials have noted that bike lanes are not safe for the increasingly different vehicles that have been using them and would like a 30 km/h speed limit. Mopeds and super-fast e-bikes have already been banned from center cities. This is by Dutchnews.nl. Yeah, this is kind of what I was talking with Ryan Russo about from NACTO, thinking about how bike lanes have evolved to take on more vehicles because the vehicles don't quite fit in car lanes because the cars are so huge and hulking and dangerous. But where do they go if they can't go there? So you're going to have to figure out, where these vehicles can go that are useful, but they're also not big enough to be in the car lane, but not small enough to be in the bike lane, and this weird gray area in between. And so how are we going to design our cities around that? Monitoring mosquito-borne illnesses. In Brownsville, Texas, mosquito monitoring keeps tabs on numerous illnesses that have increased in the United States in recent years. Illnesses such as malaria have been around at least as long as human settlements, but as we have changed our habitats and become more mobile, the threat of getting one of the many viruses mosquitoes can spread is increasing. Brownsville officials hope increased monitoring will help them address potential trouble before it spreads. This was by Umair Irfan in Vox. I think that's interesting. One of the things that I talked with Adele about, and I'm going to try to put out some bonus stuff from her because we talked for like another 30 or 40 minutes after Carlos got off the phone. But what's interesting to me is specifically in San Francisco, I never thought I was going to have to worry about mosquitoes, especially coming from Texas, where Houston specifically, where mosquitoes were such a big thing. And the thing that got me was how much, when we were in San Francisco, I needed screens on my windows. And so that's something easy to address, but you have to know to address it. When you open your windows, you want to let some of that cool air in, especially in San Francisco when it's been hot for a few days and you don't have an air conditioner. But if you open the window, though, you're opening yourself up to mosquitoes, which would bite my daughter and bite me and basically leave welts on our hands and stuff. But if you have screens, you don't have to worry about it. And so little things like that make a big difference in your architecture and your design of safe spaces in the house. But there's something that, people don't really think about as much when they're thinking about architecture or design or the issues of climate change even. Light rail begins bridge tests in Seattle. Sound Transit began a full testing of the light rail on the I-90 floating bridge in Seattle, signaling the start of a new era in the region. The line, which is slated to start operations in early 2026, will connect Seattle with job centers and regional suburbs in Bellevue and Redmond. This will be the first light rail line to operate on a floating bridge, and testing has taken longer than usual, considering the movement of the bridge and the weight of the trains. This was by Mike Lindblom in Seattle Times. Yeah, congrats on Seattle to get that going. Really exciting. Hope that line opens up soon, and people are super excited about, the ushering in of a new era. Free childcare. New Mexico will offer free universal childcare for state residents starting November 1st. The program was created and approved by voters approving a constitutional amendment in 2022. Additionally, local governments and schools will be able to apply for funding to create childcare programs and facilities. Officials are hoping that this is a nationally replicable model and more care infrastructure will be available. This is by Austin Fisher in Source, New Mexico. Yeah, the cost of everything, cost of healthcare, cost of childcare, cost of care infrastructure, cost of all that stuff, it's insane. And so bringing down the cost of living, especially as those housing costs are going up, is going to be very vital to keep everybody happy and making sure that everybody can contribute to society. Not just contributing to society. I'm going to back up a second. Not just contributing to society, but just making sure people are happy and healthy. Childcare is like a lifesaver. Thinking about how much putting my daughter in daycare saves my brain space and my wife's brain space a little bit more during the day. It's amazing. We spend so much time with her and we love her so much, but at some point the 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, they are very, very easy to get into trouble from just their curiosity and touching everything and wanting to touch everything and wanting to mess with everything, and it's just like a brain saver to have her gone for 6 to 7 hours a day. So I think that's actually, just from a mental health perspective alone, that's a huge to have childcare. Fixing the heat island. Dallas Planning and Development is proposing a code amendment that would limit impervious cover on city lots. The new code would likely create more green space and trap less heat from the sun, which creates an urban heat island. Research has shown that some areas of Dallas can get 14 degrees hotter than others, and more green could reduce temperatures by up to 7 degrees. A big win for California. California lawmakers have passed SB79, a bill that would allow up to 9-story buildings adjacent to train station stops and frequent bus stops. The bill would head to the governor's desk. If signed into law, the bill would be a big win for density and transit advocates who have been pushing for this change for years. This was by Jack Fleming in Los Angeles Times. If the governor signs it, it'll be great. I think that there's a lot of cities that are freaking out over it because it's going to change some neighborhoods, but for the better. We invest all this money in this transit infrastructure, and we shouldn't just let a single family home be at a transit station. It should be allowed to build more, and property owners should be allowed to build more near it. And so if we're going to make these investments in billions and billions of dollars in subways and things like that, allowing a single family home next to it is just not the value that, and then, if you do that, then you just have to keep subsidizing the system more and more and more versus having more and more riders on the system that can contribute to it. Atlanta pollution returns. Atlanta air pollution has increased as more people return to pre-pandemic levels of activity. During the pandemic, Atlanta's ozone pollution, like many other cities, was steeply reduced. But as people get back to their regular routines and drive more, air quality has suffered. This was by Drew Cannon in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I think we're seeing that everywhere. Care infrastructure. In Flint, Michigan, in order to avoid the impacts of poverty on unborn children, a program called RX Kids gives expecting mothers $1,500 during pregnancy and $500 per month after the first year of birth. Researchers found that the program helps avoid stress and save billions of dollars in neonatal intensive care unit costs, in addition to other health benefits for the mother and the child. Blue-green traffic lights. Despite a treaty signed in 35 countries in 1968 to require traffic control devices to use red for stop and green for go, Japan has bluish go lights. The reason being the traditional Japanese language had one word for red and green, and instead of confuse the language, Japanese officials installed blue-greenish lights. Shane Schmidt and Jalopnik. Reduce fare usage. A new report from the Regional Plan Association in New York takes a look at 35 transit programs with free or reduced fares for residents, but what they found was that many of the programs were not well utilized by eligible participants. They suggest some possible solutions, including better outreach, increasing eligibility, and promoting automatic enrollment. This was by Dan Zukowski in Smart Cities Dive. Yeah, this is one of the things. People talk about free transit, but there's a lot of low-income transit programs out there, and they're underutilized. And so it might be helpful to take a look at those programs and make sure those are working really well, especially given how much money and political will it would take to do free transit and some of the issues that come along with that. I think that this is an interesting report, and I hope folks get a chance to read it. Regional Plan Association did a good job of checking out these topics specifically. The rent eats income. New research from the Joint Center for Housing Studies finds that rents are a cost burden for households and eating away at modest incomes. 65% of working households are now burdened by rents compared to 50% pre-pandemic. Researchers believe that subsidies that cap housing costs at 30% would be beneficial, but would not completely alleviate budget pressures given the other non-housing cost burdens. This was by Whitney Airgood Obricki, Alexander Herman, and Sophia Whedon at the Joint Center for Housing Studies. And then a couple of bonus items here. In Sweden, a mall that only sells secondhand items has been refreshing change of pace. The items are more organized than most secondhand stores, and it's organized and curated like retail stores selling new items. The mall is a municipal project meant to foster the circular economy. This was in the conversation. Really fascinating. I wish more places would be like that. When you go into like a Marshall's or something that sells like, items that haven't been sold or something, it's kind of a mess. But this sounds really great. It sounds like they're really curating and figuring it out. Maybe like a really good secondhand store. New research shows that air pollution has a clear connection to diseases such as Lewy body dementia. Exposure to particulates and air pollution can form proteins that are then misfolded by the brain. The good news is that air pollution can be addressed now as opposed to genetics or age. The Guardian. With more and more electric cars, Chinese drivers have been fond of one-pedal driving that allows them to speed up by pushing in and slow down by letting the gas pedal up to allow the electric motor to perform regenerative braking. But the practice may soon be banned as it has safety implications since no braking lights are activated and research has showed slower response times in emergency situations. This was in Le Ravi. And then two more. Albuquerque City Council has voted to approve bonds to fund a research center for fusion energy. The bonds will be purchased by Pacific Fusion Corporation, and the company, not the city, will be liable for the repayment, the city of Albuquerque. And finally, NRDC has put together a dashboard mapping out who in the United States doesn't have a car. They estimate 36% of Americans over age 10 don't have access to a personal vehicle for their travel needs. Obviously, this is last week, I believe, was the week without driving, and so that kind of feeds into that, and hope that it was successful for all those who participated. Thank you all for listening. This week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really would be here without you, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up all along the timeline. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you one of our scarves. And also, I want to mention that we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic Town Planning and Practice. And if you want to get your hands on one, go to http://raymondunwin.com. Also, England is actually, one thing we didn't mention in the newsletter, England is actually starting to do more planning for new towns. And they've talked about how what they did wrong with Milton Keynes was they didn't plan for a future transit system. And so they'll be doing that now with the new towns. They're planning for building more housing. And so I find that really fascinating. I'm sure they'll be using some of Raymond Unwin's planning ideas in their planning as their something that he talked about a lot about was circulation and the way that places are designed, the streets are designed, and how they connect people with each other. Listener questions and comments. If you have a comment or question, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. If you have any questions, shoot them over to theoverheadwire@gmail.com. And Puppies and Butterflies is part of the show. We talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe doesn't fit in other sections. I think I did my Puppies and Butterflies earlier, but I hope folks get a chance to visit China again. I mentioned this again at some point. You might need a translator to get the most out of it, but the food and the people are amazing. And it's frustrating a lot hearing how it's portrayed so much in the media about the war between, the war of ideas between China and the United States, the competition between the two. I wish we could make it a healthier competition than it's portrayed. There's so many great people here. There's so many great things to see. There's so much history. Admittedly, before last year when I went to China to visit my wife's family, I'd mostly been to Western Europe, and I think we'd all get along a little bit better if we understood the other side, despite our differences. That there's always going to be differences, but there's also going to be some things you can agree on. So I find that it's really good to visit a place to see how people live and what they do, and also some of their positives and maybe even some of their negatives. But in the end, it gives you a fuller picture of the place that you're talking about when you talk about a place. And I imagine that many of the people that talk negatively about China have probably never been here. Okay. You can find me on Blue Sky, Mastodon, LinkedIn, Instagram, sometimes Threads, Substack, YouTube, and of course on my website and in your inbox every morning if you sign up for the newsletter, and on Flickr at Transit Nerds. I'll try to get some of those pictures from this trip up over there on Flickr. I can't promise anything specifically just because it's like, there's so much that my brain's been trying to process, but I'll try to do it. Everything else is at the Overhead Wire. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire. Thanks to the honkers outside the window here in China. And thanks to our generous Patreons for sponsoring this week's podcast. We'll see you all the next time we see you. I'm not sure when that is, but I hope it's soon.
Talking